First Contact's Price. Admiral Xandar of the Verax Dominion stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Victory, his iridescent scales reflecting the light of an unfamiliar sun. For 10,000 cycles, the Verax had conquered every species they encountered. Their biological superiority was absolute: enhanced strength, regenerative capabilities, and neural processing speeds that made other species appear to move in slow motion. Yet something felt different about this conquest. The humans, as they called themselves, had done nothing when the Verax fleet arrived at the edge of their solar system. No desperate pleas for mercy. No futile attempts at diplomacy. No rushed military response. Just silence. Status report. Xandar commanded, his secondary heart beginning to pulse with anticipation. Scans indicate primitive technology by our standards. Admiral, his sensor officer reported. Their vessels use chemical propulsion. Their weapons are kinetic and nuclear-based. Their defensive capabilities are minimal. Xandar's upper lip curled in disappointment. Another simple conquest. The Verax had hoped for more of a challenge from a species that had managed to spread to 3 planets in their system. Begin standard conquest protocol, he ordered. Deploy the first wave. 5,000 Verax warriors, each in biomechanical combat suits that amplified their already formidable abilities, descended toward the human colony on Mars. Their combat doctrine was simple and had never failed. Overwhelm with superior force, demonstrate absolute dominance, and accept surrender. The first indication that something was wrong came when the landing zones they'd selected suddenly became invisible to their sensors. Then the ground beneath their drop ships began to shift and change, revealing massive structures that hadn't been there moments before. Primitive technology, Xandar questioned, watching as the supposedly inferior humans unveiled quantum camouflage systems and gravity manipulation technology that shouldn't have been possible with their level of development. The humans had hidden their true capabilities, but why? The answer came as their entire first wave found themselves trapped in overlapping fields of artificially generated gravity, their superior reflexes and strength meaning nothing as they were crushed between competing gravitational forces. Impossible, Xandar whispered, watching as a third of his invasion force was eliminated in minutes. The humans hadn't just prepared defenses. They'd created weapons specifically designed to counter Verax advantages. A transmission cut through their communications network, broadcasting on frequencies that should have been secure. A human voice, translated into perfect Verax speech. "We've been watching you for decades, studying how you conquer other worlds. Did you think we wouldn't prepare?" Xandar felt something he'd never experienced before: doubt. The humans hadn't just anticipated their attack. They'd wanted it. They'd hidden their true technological level, studied Verax tactics from their previous conquests, and prepared countermeasures for every advantage the Verax possessed. Second wave, launch immediately, he ordered, falling back on standard protocol despite his misgivings. All units switch to alternate communication frequencies and engage with maximum force. But the humans had anticipated this too. The second wave emerged from faster-than-light travel to find themselves surrounded by a cloud of microscopic robots that attached to their ships' hulls and began reproducing using the very material of their vessels as raw materials. "Your strategic doctrine hasn't changed in 1,000 years, the human voice continued. You rely on biological superiority and overwhelming force. But you never considered that true superiority isn't about being the strongest or fastest. It's about being the most adaptable." Xandar watched in horror as his mighty fleet was reduced to scattered atoms by technology that shouldn't have existed. The humans hadn't just developed countermeasures. They'd created weapons that turned the Verax's own strengths against them. The denser their hull material, the faster the nanobots reproduced. The more powerful their weapons, the more energy the humans had to harvest and redirect. "Retreat," he ordered, for the first time in Verax history. All units, full retreat. But retreat had never been part of their tactical doctrine. They had no protocols for it, no practiced maneuvers. In their panic and confusion, The Verax ships collided with each other, their attempts to escape becoming as devastating as the human weapons. As the Eternal Victory prepared to jump to faster-than-light speed, Xandar received one final transmission. "We could have responded when you first entered our system. We could have shown our true capabilities, but we wanted you to learn what humanity really is. We're not just another species for you to conquer. We're the ones who watch, learn, and adapt. Remember that when you tell others what happened here." The Eternal Victory escaped, one of only 3 ships from the original fleet of thousands. But they carried with them something more dangerous than any weapon: the knowledge that the galaxy contained a species that didn't play by the rules of biological superiority, a species that had turned the art of war itself into a science and patience into a weapon. In the cycles that followed, the Verax would reform their entire society. They had encountered something new, a species that didn't just fight wars, but revolutionized the very concept of warfare. The humans had taught them a costly lesson. True evolutionary success wasn't about becoming the perfect warrior, but about becoming the perfect adapter. The galaxy would never be the same. The art of invisible warfare. The Verax High Command gathered in their sacred war chamber, a vast amphitheater carved from living crystal beneath the surface of their homeworld. For the first time in their recorded history, they faced a species that had not only survived first contact, but had humiliated their finest fleet. Supreme Commander Vexthar, his scales dulled with age and wisdom, studied the holographic projections of human space. "They're expanding," he announced to the assembled War Council, "not just colonizing new worlds, but transforming them. Entire planets altered in months instead of centuries." The recordings from the Eternal Victory played again. The humans' devastating defense of Mars had shattered Verax's military doctrine, but it was what came after that truly terrified them. In the 3 cycles since that first defeat, humanity had expanded to 17 systems, using technology that defied conventional understanding. "They're not just advancing," General Ixtal observed, her bioluminescent patterns pulsing with anxiety. "They're evolving their technology faster than we can analyze it. Each new human world uses different defensive systems than the last." The intelligence reports were disturbing. Human ships seemed to appear and disappear at will, using some form of quantum displacement that made traditional space combat impossible. Their colonies were protected by artificial intelligences that could predict and counter any conventional attack before it began. But most troubling was their psychological warfare. The humans had begun broadcasting their entertainment media across all frequencies, stories of their history, their wars, their endless capacity for both creation and destruction. They wanted the Verax to watch, to learn, to understand what they were facing. "They're not just fighting us," Vexthar realized. "They're teaching us." The humans had discovered something the Verax had never considered: the power of intellectual terror. Every time the Verax developed a counter to human technology, they found that the humans had already moved on to something new. It wasn't just technological superiority, it was the speed of innovation that paralyzed them. "Latest intelligence suggests they've developed something new," reported Admiral Kralax, replacing the holographic display with fresh data. "They call it the Prometheus Protocol. We don't know what it does, but every human world is being fitted with these devices." The Verax had sent probe after probe, spy after spy, trying to understand human military capability. But the humans let them watch. They made no effort to hide their advances. Instead, they turned their very transparency into a weapon, letting the Verax see just enough to understand how outmatched they were. "They're not even treating this as a war," Ixtal said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "To them, we're a research project. They're studying how we react, how we adapt, what we do with the information they let us have." The evidence was undeniable. Human expansion followed no logical pattern. Some of their colonies appeared vulnerable, protected by outdated technology. Others were fortress worlds bristling with defenses that seemed to violate the laws of physics. They were creating a deliberate puzzle, watching how the Verax would respond. "We've intercepted their internal communications," Krylax continued. They're not afraid of us. They're fascinated by us. Their scientists study our tactics. Their historians analyze our culture. Their artists create entertainment about potential peaceful contact. This was warfare on a level the Varax had never imagined. The humans had turned their greatest weapon, their diversity of thought and approach, into a psychological offensive that was eroding the very foundation of Varax society. Young Varax were beginning to question the wisdom of biological superiority. Cultural engineers were studying human adaptability. Military theorists were advocating for complete doctrine reform. They're forcing us to evolve, Vexthar concluded, not through combat, but through example. Every move they make shows us a new possibility we never considered. They're not trying to defeat us. They're trying to change us. The war chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The Varax had evolved to be perfect warriors, but the humans had evolved to be perfect teachers. They didn't just defeat their enemies, they transformed them. We have three choices, Vexthar announced to the council. We can attack and be destroyed. We can isolate ourselves and stagnate. Or we can do what no Varax has ever considered. We can learn from a species we once thought to conquer. The decision they would make would determine not just the future of the Varax, but their very identity as a species. The humans had launched an invasion more subtle and devastating than any in history, an invasion of ideas. And somewhere in human space, researchers were watching, recording, and preparing for whatever choice the Varax would make. The true power of humanity wasn't in their weapons or their technology. It was in their ability to turn every situation, even potential conflict, into an opportunity for growth, both for themselves and for those who would be their enemies. Breaking point. The first riots broke out in the spawning centers of Varax Prime. Young warriors, their scales still bright with youth, refused their genetic optimization treatments. They had seen the human broadcasts, studied their history, and reached a shocking conclusion. Forced biological perfection was a form of stagnation. In the highest spire of the capital hive, arch-geneticist Zarkin watched the chaos unfold through security feeds. For 50,000 cycles, the Varax had bred themselves for perfect warfare, optimizing every generation for greater strength, faster reflexes, and more aggressive instincts. Now, in just 5 cycles of human contact, that carefully constructed genetic destiny was unraveling. They're calling it the Liberation Movement, reported his assistant, Tyra, her scales shifting through patterns of distress. They're demanding the right to choose their own genetic paths. Some are even requesting permission to study human adaptive techniques. The deeper crisis wasn't just political, it was existential. Human broadcasts had revealed a species that celebrated its imperfections, that turned its weaknesses into strengths. They showed worlds where a single city contained more diversity than the entire Varax Empire, where different approaches and perspectives were seen as advantages rather than flaws. "Show me the latest data from the observation posts," Zarkin commanded, his secondary heart racing with anxiety. The holographic displays filled with information about human expansion. They had nearly doubled their territory again, but that wasn't what caught his attention. Each new human world was different. Some focused on research, others on production, others on art and culture. No standardization, no optimization, just endless variation. They're not just allowing imperfection, he realized. They're weaponizing it. The evidence was in their technology. Human ships weren't standardized like Varax vessels. Each one was unique, modified by its crew, evolving through use and experience. Their weapons weren't mass-produced, but constantly refined and reimagined. Even their artificial intelligences showed individual quirks and personalities. In the military academies, the crisis was even more acute. Young officers were abandoning traditional combat doctrines, arguing that the Varax's drive for perfection had made them predictable. They studied human military history obsessively, fascinated by how a supposedly inferior species had turned tactical flexibility into an unstoppable advantage. "The Promethean protocols," Tyra said, bringing up new data. We've finally decoded part of them. They're not weapons at all. They're learning systems. The humans are seeding their worlds with artificial intelligences designed to generate new ideas, to experiment with different approaches to every problem. Zarkin felt his worldview shifting. The Verax had always seen imperfection as weakness, variation as inefficiency. But the humans had proved that diversity wasn't just strength, it was the key to survival itself. The breaking point came during the Grand Council meeting. Traditional hardliners argued for a full-scale assault on human space, believing that only victory in combat could restore the Verax's shaken confidence. Reformers advocated for diplomatic contact, suggesting that the humans might teach them new paths to greatness. But it was a young scientist named HFY who silenced the chamber with a simple observation. The humans didn't defeat us. They exposed us. We thought biological perfection made us superior, but it really made us rigid. They showed us that true evolutionary success isn't about reaching perfection. It's about maintaining the ability to change. The word sparked a revolution. Across Verax space, populations began demanding the right to explore new genetic paths. Military units started experimenting with flexible tactics and individual initiative. Research centers shifted focus from optimization to adaptation. The old guard fought back, of course. They couldn't accept that 10,000 cycles of genetic engineering had led them to an evolutionary dead end. But they found themselves facing a new kind of enemy. Their own children, armed with human ideas about progress and change. As civil unrest spread across Verax space, the humans simply watched and waited. Their broadcasts continued, showing worlds where countless different approaches to life could coexist and thrive. They made no hostile moves, launched no attacks. They didn't have to. The very idea of human adaptability was doing what no weapon could. It was transforming Verax civilization from within. In his spire, Zarkin made a decision that would change the course of his species. He authorized the first genetic experiments aimed not at perfection, but at adaptability. The Verax would either evolve beyond their rigid pursuit of biological superiority, or it would fade into extinction, replaced by those who understood that imperfection was the price of growth. And somewhere in human space, researchers noted the change and added it to their growing database of species evolution, knowing that the greatest victories weren't won through combat, but through the irresistible power of a better idea. The human variable. Dr. Sarah Chen stood before the United Earth Council, her holographic presentation showing the spread of social upheaval across Verax space. After 5 years of studying their response to human civilization, the patterns were unmistakable. The Verax weren't just changing, they were fragmenting into something entirely new. Our initial assessment was wrong, she explained to the assembled representatives. We thought their genetic engineering made them stronger. Instead, it made them fragile. They engineered out the very thing that makes adaptation possible: variation. The data streams showed it clearly. Every Verax colony was identical. Every ship followed the same patterns. Every tactical response could be predicted with mathematical precision. They had achieved their goal of biological perfection, but at a terrible cost. They had lost the ability to face the unexpected. And now, asked Counselor Rodriguez, leaning forward in his chair. Now they're experiencing what we call a cascading paradigm shift, Sarah replied. Their younger generation is rejecting genetic standardization. Their military is abandoning rigid doctrine. Some colonies are even experimenting with democratic systems. They're not just copying us. They're rediscovering their own capacity for change. The council chamber buzzed with discussion. Humanity's approach to the Verax threat had been controversial from the start. Instead of meeting force with force, they had chosen to simply reveal themselves fully. Their arts, their sciences, their endless variety of cultures and approaches to life. It was a form of warfare that had never been attempted before, conquest through inspiration. Admiral James Chen, Sarah's brother and commander of the 7th Fleet, stepped forward to present the military perspective. The Verax fleet movements have become chaotic, but not in the way we expected. Different battle groups are adopting different tactics. Some are even reaching out for diplomatic contact. Their military unity is shattered. The screens showed the transformation. Verax ships, once identical down to the smallest detail, were being modified by their crews. Some emphasized speed, others defense. Some had even begun incorporating human design principles, sacrificing biological optimization for technological innovation. But the real breakthrough is happening in their research centers, Sarah continued. They've begun experimenting with controlled genetic diversity. After 10,000 years of breeding for uniformity, they're deliberately introducing variation into their population. They're trying to evolve. The implications were staggering. Humanity hadn't just defeated a powerful enemy, they had inadvertently triggered a species-wide renaissance. The Verax were rediscovering concepts their society had engineered away generations ago. Creativity, individuality, the value of different perspectives. There's more, Admiral Chen added. Our deep space sensors have detected unusual activity in the outer regions of Verax space. Some of their colonies are developing completely new social structures. They're not just copying Earth models, they're innovating, creating hybrid systems we've never seen before. The council chamber fell silent as the true magnitude of what was happening became clear. Humanity's greatest weapon had turned out to be something the Verax had never considered: the power of example. By simply existing as they were, diverse, adaptable, eternally changing, humans had shown the Verax a different path to species survival. We're receiving more diplomatic requests every day, Sarah reported, not just from their central government, but from individual colonies, research centers, even military units. They don't want our technology or our resources. They want to understand how we maintain unity despite our differences, how we turn diversity into strength. But not all the news was positive. Reports showed growing conflict between traditional Verax power structures and emerging reform movements. Some worlds had descended into civil unrest as different factions fought for control of genetic engineering facilities. The Verax were learning the hard lesson that change, while necessary for survival, was never painless. We need to make a decision, Admiral Chen stated. Do we continue to maintain our distance and observe, or do we begin actively engaging with those elements of Verax society that are reaching out to us? The question sparked intense debate in the council chamber. Some argued for continued observation, letting the Verax work through their transformation alone. Others advocated for limited engagement, offering guidance to prevent their society from completely collapsing. But Dr. Chen had one final piece of data to share. We analyzed their genetic experiments. They're not just trying to copy human adaptability. They're attempting to engineer controlled randomness into their genome. They're trying to design unpredictability into their own species. It's brilliant, unprecedented, and incredibly dangerous if done wrong. The Council's decision would shape not just the future of human-Verax relations, but potentially the course of galactic evolution. Humanity had proven that true strength lay not in achieving perfection, but in maintaining the capacity for endless change. Now they faced a new challenge: helping a species that had engineered itself into an evolutionary dead end find its way back to the path of natural development. And somewhere in the vast expanse of space, young Verax looked up at the stars and dreamed not of conquest, but of transformation, wondering what new forms their species might take once they embraced the human gift of perpetual change. Evolution's answer. The Grand Chamber of the First Contact Center on Neutral Territory Station Unity held representatives from both species. What had begun as a potential war had transformed into something unprecedented in galactic history: a controlled species-wide evolutionary shift. Supreme Commander Vexthar, now bearing the new title of Transformation Director, faced the assembled human delegation. His scales showed patterns that would have been considered imperfect just cycles ago, subtle variations that marked him as part of the new generation of Verax leadership. "We understand now," he began, his translator conveying not just words, but the complex bioluminescent patterns that carried deeper meaning in Varak's communication. For 10,000 cycles, we thought we were advancing. Instead, we were standing still, trapped in a prison of our own perfection. Dr. Sarah Chen nodded, surrounded by holographic displays showing the remarkable transformation of Varak's society over the past decade. What had started as civil unrest had evolved into a controlled revolution, with different Varak's worlds choosing different paths forward. The Promethean protocols, she replied, were never weapons. They were mirrors designed to show each species its own potential for change. We deployed them on our worlds not to defend against you, but to ensure we never fell into the same trap of presumed perfection. The data streams told the story. Some Varak's colonies had chosen to maintain their traditional genetic structures while adopting human approaches to technology and social organization. Others had embraced controlled genetic diversity, deliberately engineering variation into their population. Still others had abandoned engineering altogether, choosing to let natural selection resume its work. Admiral James Chen stepped forward, addressing the military aspects. Your battle fleets are transforming too. Each ship now shows individual modifications, tactical innovations we've never seen before. You're not just copying human designs, you're creating entirely new approaches to space combat. The Varak's delegation's patterns shifted in what humans had learned to recognize as pride, not the old pride of presumed superiority, but the pride of genuine achievement. Their ships now displayed as much variety as human vessels, each one a unique combination of biological and technological innovation. But the greatest change, Vexthar continued, is in how we see ourselves. We thought biological perfection made us superior. Instead, it made us predictable, inflexible, unable to face new challenges. You showed us that true evolutionary success lies not in achieving perfection, but in maintaining the ability to adapt. The holographic displays showed the spread of change across Varak space. Different colonies had developed different solutions to the same problems, creating a diversity of approaches that made their civilization stronger as a whole. They had learned humanity's greatest lesson. That strength lies not in uniformity, but in variety. There are still those who resist, Vexthar acknowledged. Some colonies maintain the old ways, believing that genetic perfection is the only path forward. But even this division serves a purpose. It maintains diversity within our species, ensuring we never again lock ourselves into a single path. Dr. Chen activated a new display, showing the latest genetic data from Varak's research centers. You've done something remarkable, she explained. Instead of engineering for specific traits, you're now engineering for adaptability itself. You're not just changing your current form, you're ensuring your species can continue to change as needed. The implications were staggering. The Varaks had transformed their greatest weakness, their engineered uniformity, into a new kind of strength. Different colonies now served as evolutionary laboratories, testing different approaches to adaptation while maintaining communication and cooperation. We request formal alliance, Vexthar announced, causing ripples of surprise through both delegations. Not as superior and inferior, not as teacher and student, but as species who understand that the only true perfection is the ability to change. The human delegation shared glances. This was more than they had hoped for. The Varaks hadn't just learned from humanity. They had taken those lessons and created something entirely new. Their society now displayed a level of controlled diversity that even humans found remarkable. We accept, Dr. Chen replied, with one condition: that we continue to challenge each other, to push the boundaries of what's possible, not through combat, but through innovation, through the exchange of ideas and approaches. The agreement they reached that day would reshape galactic civilization. The Varaks brought their mastery of biological engineering, tempered now by an understanding of the importance of diversity. Humans brought their adaptability and creativity, their endless drive to explore new possibilities. Together, they began reaching out to other species, sharing their hard-won wisdom. that true evolutionary success lay not in achieving perfection, but in maintaining the capacity for endless change. That strength came not from uniformity, but from diversity. That the greatest victories were won not through combat, but through transformation. And in the vast tapestry of space, both species continued to evolve, not toward some predetermined perfect form, but toward an ever-expanding range of possibilities. They had discovered that the true apex of evolution wasn't a final perfect form, but the eternal capacity to become something new. The stars watched as a new era began, one where the measure of a species' greatness lay not in its achievements, but in its potential for change. And somewhere in the depths of space, new civilizations waited to learn this lesson, as humanity and the Verax ventured forth together, not as conquerors, but as teachers of the greatest truth in the universe. That life's greatest strength is its ability to never stop growing.